Hello, everyone. I see the chat has started, um, and I'm glad to be kicking this off. My name is Nick. I'm the head of engineering at OfferZen, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. We're going to be asking Mike some nice questions. We're going to be having a good discussion, and we're going to be also asking him some questions from the crowd in the chat. So yeah, the webinar today is how to leverage AI for developer productivity, which is pretty much the ultimate question that everybody is asking, and I'm keen to get into it. So let's just take 1 minute just to talk about some ground rules, and what we're gonna start off with was just, it is lunchtime. Don't forget to eat. Don't forget to have a drink, make a cup of coffee, get a sandwich, and come and sit down and listen to a good conversation. Quite a few people are dropping their names in the chat already. Feel free to join in the fun. Also share your location. Let's see where people are joining from. And yeah, also feel free to reach out to each other on LinkedIn. It is a community event, and let's connect further, make the community one little connection stronger. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so just a few words about OfferZen. We've got a slide going here. So basically, OfferZen is a developer talent marketplace. We were founded in Cape Town back in 2016, so we've been going for about 8 years now. And since then, we've expanded to what we call Middle Earth. So that is the GMT +2 time zone, which spans, if you look at a picture of the map, you'll see it spans throughout Africa and up to Europe. Okay, so OfferZen is a marketplace. We help over 2,000 companies in Africa and Europe hire from curated, job-seeking software developers. On OfferZen, companies can reach out directly to skilled developers and get upfront information about their tech stack, about their previous roles, about their salary expectations. And the best part about it is that on average, companies are taking 25 days to fill their roles. Okay, so we've got a strong focus on community. This is one of those community events. We are developers. We built a developer platform, and yeah, we are devs and tech leaders just like you. So please feel free to use whatever language you want. It's, you don't have to reframe anything here. And if you're hiring, looking for developers, a poll is going to pop up on your screen right now, and please select an item to show your intent. If you are keen to make some hires with us, please fill that in. Okay, thank you. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping. So we have some rules of engagement. First of all, you can see us, but we can't see you. So when Mike comes on the stage, it'll be me and Mike having a conversation, but all we can see is what you post in the chat and the questions that you ask. If you do need to drop off, you'll be able to come back anytime, back to the same link that you registered with. So feel free to come and go as you need. And then, yeah, there's a questions tab at the bottom right of the Livestorm view that you're seeing now, so, or just next to the chat. That is the best place to ask questions. Of course, we don't all get it right. Some appear in the chat tab as well, but feel free to ask your questions there. And then if you have comments or you want to, hear from the rest of the crowd on some of the things we're talking about, post them in the chat. That's a place that we can, chat through many things, take things offline later. So yeah, please feel free to do that. Okay, and yeah, we are welcoming, let's see if we have, okay, there's many waves and people chatting. That's great already, so you're familiar with that. All right, so we are diving into the topic of how do we leverage AI for developer productivity. We're going to be joined by Mike Davis, who is the head of engineering at Root, and he is going to be joining the stage now. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Nick. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thanks. And you?
Pretty good. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think a few people, they've already said in the chat that they are keen to dive into this topic. And yeah, maybe just before we get there, would you mind giving us a bit of a brief intro as to, your background, why you care about AI? Yeah, take it away.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I'm Mike Davis. I've got a history of building like SaaS platforms at scale. I've got a little bit of an out of control hobby, which is information security. And that has now turned into more of an AI out of control hobby. But I've done a little bit of machine learning and more recently just focusing on LLMs, kind of testing the limits of what's possible, processing a lot of data with LLMs. I have a cybersecurity YouTube channel that's all unsupervised and generated by an LLM or a couple of them. And then just generally interested in making life more efficient and productive with daily life, automation with AI and dev tooling. And then more recently, I've just finished an MBA at the UCT Graduate School of Business. And my research report was focused on LLM-based dev tool adoption. So it's quite appropriate for the topic today. Otherwise, I'm the head of engineering at Root. And so Root's a platform for quickly building and deploying insurance and fintech products. So we've got a heavy focus on dev tooling, got a workbench and a well-documented comprehensive API. And we don't have AI at the core, but we've got a lot of things around the edges of it. So helping clients query data, that kind of thing. And we actively encourage the use of AI tools at Root. So again, very interesting topic.
Okay, great. Thanks. I see Mr. John Dalton has identified a typo in your name, but just to clarify, how do you say your surname or spell your surname for him?
It's Mike Davis. So the E, it's a common mistake. I've been called Mike Davies my whole life, but it's Mike Davis without the E. So if you're looking for me on LinkedIn, I'm Mike Davis without the E. Yeah.
Cool. My surname is similar. There's always a typo in mine. Okay, and we have some people from Caroline is from Scotland, and we have someone else joining from Langebaan. I'm glad to see that there are different people coming from all across the Middle Earth time zone. Welcome.
Nice.
Okay, so Mike, serious question. What is the weirdest thing you've asked AI or ChatGPT to do?
The weirdest thing. So I like to test models and see what they do when I ask them weird things or make them do weird things. So I always ask when I've got a new LLM I'd like to try, I ask it to make me an interesting limerick about a situation. So if I'm doing an AI webinar, it'll be like make a limerick about AI webinars and something like that. And it kind of just gives me a flavor, an understanding of the flavor of the LLM. And some of them are really bad at it. ChatGPT is really good. And Grok, the Twitter one, in fun mode is particularly interesting with its replies. So that's the weirdest thing. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So actually asking a question as a calibration technique to see, okay, how does this LLM compare to others? That's far more intellectual than my weird one of asking about Frodo's pre-ring life in amongst the rest of the things that we're trying. But maybe that is a good qualification to have to know some Tolkien lore. Cool. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We've got a couple of different themes. We're first of all going to start off with what are these tools? It's developer productivity assisted by AI. So what are the tools? How do we get our hands on them? Are they being adopted? That is that is where we're going to start. So just lay the land there. We're then going to get into a bit of the risks. So, how do we overcome some of the risks? It's a new technology. There's always risks that come with it, but presumably the benefits outweigh these risks. And maybe if we're just a little bit cautious in certain areas, we can get the most out of the tools without hurting ourselves. Okay, and then software is, of course, a team sport. If we get more made-up team members, artificial team members joining, that's great. But yeah, forming a culture around AI-enabled or AI-first type of environment, that will be the third topic of today. So it's the tools, it's the risks, and it is the culture. And then, yeah, how do we build more of that culture? So not replacing you even, how do we, make it a nice place for people to work, get more people involved, and yeah, amplify that with, through hiring if you are hiring. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, Mike, I mean, maybe, yeah, just as a point of departure, like, can you give us some context on, what are these tools that we're talking about?
Sure. We've got a poll about the tools. What tools do people use? So if we can put that one up. Obviously, okay, so I'm just going to submit my vote quickly. There we go. So there's three broad classes of tools that we can talk about when we're, as developers, kind of trying to improve our productivity and our efficiency. So I break them down into web-based tools, IDE-based tools, and then sort of coding agents. I'm not going to talk too much to the coding agent side of things because I think while they're pretty good, they're interesting. I think at the moment the net benefit is, in my opinion, a little bit low. So you spend most of your time fixing the output. But so the web-based tools, everybody knows about ChatGPT. So if you pay for ChatGPT, you're getting GPT 4.0, and it's pretty good at code. Other systems are like Google Gemini, Grok with a Q, Grok with a K. So a lot of web-based tools, and a lot of people just stick with that. So they're pretty efficient. And then getting a little bit deeper and closer to your daily daily driver tools that are built into your IDE. I use GitHub Co-pilot. I know a lot of other people use JetBrains AI Assistant, which is quite a cool tool that covers all the different languages. JetBrains produces IDEs for each language and then a generic one as well. So that's built in. I'm starting to like the idea of that one, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then interestingly, people are using local LLMs. So something that's running on your laptop connected to your IDE or to some sort of web interface. And I think that's something that probably with some of these risks, people might start doing more and more of. Yeah. I think that's pretty much it. There are probably other tools out there that I'm not aware of. I did a poll and I didn't find any extra ones. So I did a poll about a week or two ago, got 30 different people responding, and nothing unexpected except for the local LLMs. Oh.
Okay, cool. So just to frame this, so you're saying basically the web-based, like what would be just practically the difference between a web-based one and your IDE? Or are people, in terms of productivity for developers, are we asking different types of questions, or are we copy-pasting code between IDE?
So I've asked quite a few people how they use the different tools and sort of what their general process is. And it tends to be sort of like a three-stage process. So if they're using a tool in the IDE, you can use something like Co-pilot. You can sort of, while you're coding, you can add comments and then hit enter, and it'll just add a blob of code. And then you can work with it to improve that code. And then, so what I do is I move to the chat if I get stuck. So it's got a little chat interface that's kind of like the web interface. it's only good at code. And if you ask it other questions like write me a limerick, it will say, no, I'm only good at code. It'll actually refuse, which I find interesting. But you can ask it for more sort of interactive, long form questions like, how do I do a certain thing? And then it'll suggest a piece of code, which you then have to copy paste into the, into a new window. And so that's like, if you're in the IDE, you can just kind of work with that workflow, and it's pretty good. So, but then what often happens to me and to others is that they get stuck in some way. So the Copilot only has the context of the windows that you currently have open. So, and sometimes even just what you can see. So it might actually not know enough to give you a decent answer. And so then I often fall back to ChatGPT, and then I can ask it a fairly detailed question, but now it doesn't have the context. So then I'm pasting code back and forth, which, as we'll talk about later, has its own risks. But that's finally, if that doesn't work, and I'm going down that rabbit hole that ChatGPT and Copilot can get you into, then it tends to be that you fall back to the old way of doing things and just Google it. So it's kind of that loop. I really hate doing that these days.
You want it? I've never heard of. What is that? Okay, so yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the way that you ask the poll is like, are you doing this or this? I mean, there's a one answer, but by the sounds of it, you kind of have a you see all these LLMs or the web version or the IDE version as kind of your tool belt, and you seem like you chopping and changing. You're not loyal to any particular one. You're not gonna fly that flag. You're gonna use it in the way that you need to use it, or move on to find that. Would you say that's a fair take on what you're saying there?
For sure. I think you've got to use the tool that's appropriate for the job. So if the one's better or worse, then you've got to use a different tool. And I think someone's saying Stack Overflow is still the best. I agree. So there's some high quality answers on the internet still, even though I suppose that's what it's trained on. One of the important things to note is I pay for all of those tools. So I think that might be something that is not what everybody does. So I pay for ChatGPT and Copilot. I'm a little bit over enthusiastic about it. But often you'll find that people will have access to Copilot only. So they'll stay within that. So they'll switch between Copilot and Google, something like that.
Okay. So yeah, maybe an important distinction there. Like if we're talking about the productivity gains that you can potentially unlock, what does that come at a cost? I mean, most of the things you've put here in the poll are, the paid for versions, or like you pay at some point to get these productivity gains. What's your take on using the free tools?
It's kind of interesting. I don't know if you saw this morning, ChatGPT released GPT 4.0 for free use. So literally, I woke up this morning and there it was. I haven't tried it, but that for me is like a game changer for everybody. I would say the free GPT 3.5, which is the previous version, that's kind of like a net neutral in terms of productivity and efficiency. Like it does a lot of hallucinations, and it can be inaccurate, so not always answer your question properly. But GPT 4.0 is pretty solid. So I have to change my opinion on the fly now, as you do with these things. So it moves so quickly, it's insane. So it's going to be free. We can talk to the risks of that later on. That old saying, if you're not paying for the product, then the product is you, is kind of true with GPT free versions. And then there's no free Copilot that I'm aware of. So yeah, so I think that's an interesting distinction there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I saw the interview with the CTO on releasing that, but I didn't know when it was becoming free for everyone. And I heard it was the intention. I don't know what limitations are in place there yet either. But yeah, good to know. Simbarashi, it's free now. You can get the benefits. Okay, so yeah, Mike, I mean, there's, the whole world talking about, using AI for productivity tooling. I mean, you've been doing your research on it. What's the sort of adoption looking like? Is it still pent up in, is it an untapped sort of gold mine there, or like, are people seeing it more practically?
So I did that poll. So when I did my research, I did interviews with sort of tech leaders in Cape Town and in South Africa. And my initial research was to try and measure the productivity gains and efficiency gains. I had to change my topic because it turned out that most people were not using it for a lot of different reasons within their companies. And they, varying from not allowing it because of sort of the risks associated with it, all the way to just being a little bit worried about it. So that's how it was last year, around about November, December. And the poll that I put out 2 weeks ago, it shows that at least 50% of people are using it now. So it's gone from around about sort of 5% or 10% all the way up to 50% in that time. So I think it's changed a lot. A lot more people are using it, but there still are concerns. Still are like the other 50% that are a little bit nervous about it, or have concerns, or are not explicitly allowed. Yeah.
Okay, concerns okay, I think we're going to get into the company concerns. Are there any concerns from an individual? I mean, I saw some comments on like, when's it going to replace me? Is that the main thing there, or what are those concerns for people?
Yeah, I think from the personal perspective, that fear of, there's a couple of personal fears that I think a lot of developers especially have. And one of them is that, am I going to lose my job to AI? Eventually, it'll be doing my job for me. I feel like there's that interesting saying, AI won't take your job or your company or your clients, but someone using AI will. So it's kind of like that fear of losing a job. I think if you're using AI, you'll be fine. So that's one of the fears. And then the other one is just of losing your skills, like not being losing your edge. So if the AI is doing the work for you all the time, then you're not digging into the details and understanding the depths of the code, or like how it works, or I do feel that honestly, personally, that when I move to a machine that doesn't have these tools, I actually get a little bit lost. So it is a real risk, but I think it's a fear people have. Yeah, it's kind of like a personal fear as a developer, or that you'll lose your utility to the world. Yeah, and your ability.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it almost becomes a dependency of its own. That you pretty much rely on or trying to get things done with. If you
it's quite real.
Okay,
it's very real. Like for me, I mean, I go without the tool, and I kind of go, oh, how do I do all these things again? Or the internet goes down, and you just sit there. I can't code without the internet.
Okay.
But I think an interesting analogy just one more point on that. Interesting analogy is back in the day when they started introducing compilers, there were very similar concerns about not knowing how to do assembly language, not understanding the CPU and the depths of the memory, and that's how the system works. And I think we're doing fine, So it's just an extra layer of abstraction on top of that.
Yes, the abstraction has been around for a long time. Okay. But yeah, okay, but very real concerns. I don't think those are anything to sort of diminish or to minimize if people are feeling them. I do think it is a barrier to some of the adoption, but it's great to see. I mean, that sort of rate of adoption just this year alone is, that seems like it's just on the up. It's going to be hard to come back from that.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's definitely encouraging. Like if you're not using it, that's a good data informed way to say like, yeah, actually, let me start trying to get some of these gains or these developer productivity gains.
Yeah.
On that, Mike. So, just in general, what are those sort of gains? Like just in laying the scene, like what could we use it for?
So I think there's some downfalls, but I'll ignore those for now. So I call those the little traps you can get yourself into. But in terms of the gains, definitely where you're unfamiliar with a framework or you're unfamiliar with perhaps a way of doing things, you can get bootstrapped very quickly. So you find a lot of times you'll get stuck with the details of something you don't understand. And so it helps a lot to just get bootstrapped and to move past that initial sort of difficult learning curve that most people find themselves in. So I think, and we all have to introduce new frameworks, new ways of working, and it just smooths that over. So it fills in those gaps very quickly. And then I find also, so as Gavin's saying, getting people up and running very quickly into your environment and your context, it's really good at that. And then I think also, like, I really personally enjoy just asking it to do all the boilerplate for me. So if there's a particular framework or way of doing something that has a lot of boilerplate or a lot of sort of common bits of code, I can just literally hit tab and hope for the best. And that works out pretty well. And that's what I miss the most, to be honest, is that kind of boilerplate kind of filling in. And then when I'm writing tests, it's especially good at that. So asking it to help me get a new viewpoint on code. And this is something that a lot of devs, when I talk to them, they talk to this as well. So getting a fresh viewpoint on how to approach something. So they get a little bit stuck with a problem and go into the chat and say, what are the other ways of doing this? What are some common patterns and themes? And just trying to get out of a sort of a little trap that you got yourself into. So those are the main ones that I can think of. I don't know if I can see a lot in the chat going on. ChatGPT is down. Yes. do you have any?
Okay. So
yeah.
Just looking at what you're saying, so it's like, having that companion aspect to say like, bring a fresh perspective here. Like even if you ask people, the tap on the shoulder, if you're back in the office, that is still limited. There are great people around you, but you can always ask for another fresh perspective from this type of tooling. So that companion aspect seems very interesting. And then you mentioned about the hard skills of like actually writing the boilerplate. So just getting started, tweaking it from there. That's cool. But interesting. I never really thought about if your company is actually good at using AI for productivity, the onboarding phase, you said like, it's actually really good to build context in a new code base or a new area of the system. Building that context quickly can be, very powerful. You can save probably weeks in terms of, learning the new, how do we do it in this language or this code base? That's a fresh idea for me. That seems great.
Just two more things that I find useful. One of them is to say to Copilot or ChatGPT, like, draw me a diagram of something in this code, like the dependency graph or something like that. It's actually pretty good at that. And so for one of the exercises that we went through at Root, we were trying to figure out why the complexity was so high. So I just said, hey, give me a diagram of the code, all the functions in the code and all the dependencies, and it just worked through that. And it led us to understand the code a lot better. So that sort of talks to your point. And then the final one that I forgot about it, but debugging. Like if you have a SQL query and you are stuck and you're like, why is this thing performing badly? You can drop the SQL query and drop an explain plan into ChatGPT and say, how do I optimize this? How do I fix it? And it's actually very good at telling you to change the query or to add an index or something like that. So yeah, it's another way of looking at it.
Okay, cool. If we do you have any? So I mean, you did your research on a lot of this. Were there any? So these are great points. Like people can go and you can really see okay, there's opportunity here. Have you got any if I'm still not convinced? Do you have any hard use cases to say actually this company did this and they got these sort of gains? Are we far along enough in AI to sort of have those case studies?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. So generally, Silicon Valley is of the opinion that AI is going to, change the way we work. So I think a lot of Silicon Valley is kind of approaching things with that in mind. So they are sorry, I'm using a little bit of an abstract explanation here. Sorry about that. But if you look at the way they're doing funding, they're saying we're not going to fund a large team anymore. We'll fund a smaller team to do a POC and then go from there and expect people to have dev tools in their toolbox, AI tools, sorry, and to produce more code more quickly. So that's one way of looking at it. But then I think the other way to look at it is we're not quite far enough down the path to. It's a tough thing to measure. I can talk about measuring the productivity gains, but it's a tough thing to measure, especially externally. Apart from as a company, you're doing better than expected, or producing more or more features or that kind of thing. So I haven't seen any case studies. It's a little bit too fresh, but I am looking forward to that. Expect them to come out in the next year or so. Lots of research into this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we were chatting the other day, and you said basically, even if there is a change in cycle time, like you're shipping more, that just becomes the norm as well. And then the gains, I don't know, maybe disappear or like, what's the opportunity now? But it might not be that every day you're getting these gains. It might just become regular.
Yeah, I think so agile, I suppose, is supposed to be adaptive. And so the sprint velocity is sort of a function of how the team estimates things. So what you see is when you introduce the tools into the team explicitly, then you kind of see the sprint velocity go up and then come back down to the average. So they kind of stop bringing in the tools into their thinking, and it becomes hard to measure. And you don't see a straight increase in sprint velocity. So you're just kind of there was a nice bump and then it went down. What happened? So I think there's other measures, sort of DORA metrics help a bit with that. And then sort of just generally looking at your feature release speed and the turnaround on features is where you start to see the impact. And you can see that going up. So it is quite cool. There are ways to measure it, but it's a little bit. It's not as easy as it should be.
Okay. So yeah, there's probably some advancements coming, but yeah, I mean, maybe there's. I mean, for now, it's probably a little bit qualitative. Let's speak more to the space framework of how ask your developer, and let's see, do they feel more productive? Are they getting more things done? Is the nature of the work more focused on, using, solving the problem versus putting up the boilerplate?
I do have a slide on. Do I have a slide? Yes, I have a slide on the poll. Should I show that quickly? In terms of productivity and problem-solving speed.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Let me try, let me share the screen. I hope this shows up. There we go. I hope that shows up nicely and you can see what I'm showing here. But so the poll asked, how do the tools affect productivity and then problem solving speed? And so you can see the majority said it's improved in both spaces. Some people said no change, and then a surprising amount said, I don't know. So I think that speaks a little bit to that difficulty in measuring the difference. With these kind of tools, I think it's a bit of what I said before. It's easier to measure when you take the tool away. So if you take the tool away for a week or so, then you'll know the difference, the impact it has on your daily sort of experience. But still, the majority of people said that they had some sort of improvement. And again, from the polls and the interviews that I did last year, this is dramatically higher than before. So it's very interesting. I think that the tools are getting better and improving just the general developer experience as they get better.
Okay, great. Oh, thanks for sharing the latest research from your survey. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, so there's quite a few questions. I think Stefan Bass has mentioned it and maybe started a bit of a theme here. Like, I think it's good time to get into the risks. So, like, I mean, there's been a couple of comments on, like, IP data protection. Like, let's, what are those risks? What's holding back adoption? Can we dive into that? I mean, what's your experience been?
Cool. So like I said, when I did the research reports, there were like a lot of things holding companies back, a lot of uncertainty around the impact of the tools and how to use them. And so that was holding sort of 90-odd%, stopping them from actually diving in and using the tools. In the meantime, there's been quite a better understanding of the risks and how to mitigate them. One thing I can say is that if you pay for the enterprise or business level tools, or you use specific tools, then a lot of these risks just go away. So the companies actually guarantee that these risks aren't an issue. So I'll talk about the risks more specifically. So I think IP loss has been mentioned. There's data loss. So in other words, data moving from, in terms of GDPR or privacy, data moving between one privacy regime and another, or simply having private information go into the hands of another company. There's a thing that I'm calling it IP pollution. So I think there's other ways of phrasing that, but it's basically something like GPL code coming into your code base. I'll talk to these points a little bit more in a second, but and then there's the security or the quality of code produced. So a lot of senior developers are quite worried about sort of LLM produced code going directly into the code base and then introducing a security issue or quality issue. So I think that's quite a common concern about new developers coming in and doing that kind of thing. And then there's the last sort of risk that I know about, that is just being over reliant on the tooling and never learning how to actually code in certain ways. So I'll talk to IP loss, because I think that's been mentioned quite a bit.
Yeah, and maybe just explain, like, just practical, what is IP and what is IP loss like?
Yeah, so intellectual property. So obviously, when you write code, you're doing it to add business value in some way. So you're writing it for the business, and collectively, that's the intellectual property of the business, is your code and all the different ways of doing things or operating your business. And losing that IP it's a little bit of a weird thing to talk about. It means someone else has that IP or can have that IP. And I think it's, in my opinion, it's something that's difficult to quantify unless you're talking about maybe an algorithm or something very specific to your, sorry, I'm talking about in this context, it's difficult to quantify because you're going to leak that by giving it to another company. So to OpenAI or to Microsoft or whomever it may be, and they're going to train the model on that. And then it's going to, the risk is that the LLM spits that back out into someone else's code base. So if you have this very specific algorithm and you say, how do I can't think of one to be honest, but how do I do this very specific thing in the finance industry, for instance? And then it just literally takes your code because it's not something that's publicly available and spits it out to another finance company. That would be IP loss. And in that case, you've lost your advantage. And so the way to mitigate that is, I suppose, firstly, don't put that code into an LLM. That's an obvious one. But the easier way is to pay for the business packages or the enterprise versions. So I've got a list of all the how the different companies approach sort of training models using your data. And what's actually more interesting is what they don't say. So they all mention enterprise and business packages, and then they don't talk about everything else. So if you're using the private Co-pilot or you're using free ChatGPT or even paid ChatGPT, then they're training on your data. So that risk is present. But I think the actual risk of that happening is quite low because you are asking an LLM to generate code, and it is interpreting the code and then producing new code. So, and that's especially true these days. So as they get better. So I personally feel that risk is quite low. But if you want to guarantee it, just pay for the business or enterprise packages. Should we talk about IP pollution? That's a slightly more interesting edge case.
Yeah. And you heard it here first from Mike, coining the term IP pollution.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the first person to say that, but I think it is. Yeah, I'll call it my own. So basically, if you're working with open source projects, you have to be quite careful with licenses like the GPL and such, because they are, I've forgotten the phrase, but basically if you introduce that code into your code base, then you have to make your code free, or you have to comply with their license for the rest of the code base. They have a name for that effect, but that's intentional. And the earlier versions of GPT, say GPT-3, if you asked it for a particular piece of code, it might actually spit out the code and then the license around that. So you would accidentally introduce a GPL license into your code. And as the models have gotten better, they're not just regurgitating code, they're now generating code. And so that problem has stopped actually happening. But you do still need to be aware of that problem and just understand that if that happens, it's quite an issue for your code base. And the way to do that is to just have good peer reviews and obviously educate developers on that risk. So I honestly haven't seen that since last year sometime, but just something to be aware of because it could cause a problem. I think talking to the security and the quality of the code, that is a risk. But I think, again, it's good quality peer reviews and basically good coding practices, OWASP top 10, all that kind of thing. So education of the developers, it's like very important to be aware that a lot of the code that LLMs are trained on is internet, does come from the internet and may have issues in it. So just be careful and just review the code that's put in. So yeah, that's the main mitigation. Just make sure that you understand what's going into the code and that it's being checked by other eyes.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, these risks exist, but I mean, it's just using AI is not a substitute for still having good CI and checks in your code base. I mean, It doesn't mean just because you have a companion that it's checked already through because it produced the code. It doesn't replace other developers actually checking it.
Yeah, for sure. One point is, though, if you ask, you can ask ChatGPT to generate some code and then immediately ask it, does it have any bugs or security issues? And it's actually slightly better at checking its code than generating it. So sometimes it'll go, oh yes, I see a security issue or a bug, and then it'll fix it. So I do that every now and then with something, some of the more complex code that it generates, just also for interest sake. Yeah.
Just while we're here, Wayne was asking, as people become more reliant on AI, do you think it sort of affects their ability to debug or determine if this AI-generated code is actually fit for purpose? So, I mean, we used to have the Stack Overflow developer just copy-pasting it into the code base to see if it works. Is that now an issue?
I think so. I think we need to look at the code and review it and understand it properly. I think it's even easier than copying and pasting from Stack Overflow now. So the risk is that risk does exist. But again, I think we, as developers, we do learn from the code that we write, and even the templates. So I think we do need to examine the code and learn and understand what it's doing, and then have other eyes on it. So I think definitely, again, teamwork and code reviews. So I'm getting distracted by the chat a little bit. Not only the code that's incorrect, but the theoretical explanation. Okay. Yeah, I think. I wonder if that's maybe for older versions of ChatGPT or for Co-pilot. I think a lot of them are better now at explaining themselves. So you can also ask it to explain how it came up with a particular answer, and say what is it that you did there? Like why did you produce this code? And it's often quite good at that. The older versions were not always that great. So explaining themselves was not their strength. I'm kind of excited to see what happens with the new release of GPT 4.0 publicly, because I think that's going to change how pretty much everyone in the world interacts with it, and the results that they get. So yeah, very excited by that.
Mike, we're talking about the risks. It does seem like, yes, you must ask the legal team for legal advice. You're not giving legal advice, but taking a pragmatic view on like, okay, well, what's the chance of this happening in the context that you've worked, and the code base that you worked on it. I mean, other people might have much more strict requirements than that, but there is a path through by the sound of it. Like there are ways to, make sure that you're doing the right job or the right thing and not leaking data or IP. Is your, like, if we talk about data protection that you mentioned, what's an example of that? And like, what's your advice to people to figure out if it's safe to do?
So data protection is just an interesting topic on its own. I think generally speaking, you should be very careful. It doesn't matter if you're using GPT or if you're using other tools. You need to be aware of how if you're taking customer data between A and B, you need to be quite aware of what you're doing, and quite careful. I think it's just something to educate your team on and say, hey, don't upload a CSV with your customer data to any tool, because it might get lost in some way, but specifically to a tool that can understand what's in there and perhaps use it to train the model. So I think it's basically just follow data protection practices. It just feels quite easy to upload a CSV to ChatGPT.
It's too easy.
Just say, hey, what's going on here, or what's, and then oh no, you've actually caused an incident. So I think it's just awareness of like you should have good awareness of standard data protection standards. So it's just a little bit too easy for to leak the data.
Okay. So yeah, Mike, I mean, part of that is like awareness. It also speaks to the culture of the team. I mean, there's also the culture of doing, good code reviews and giving good feedback. What's your experience been with developing a culture, around using these AI tools for productivity? Any advice that you can give on that as well?
I do have a lot of advice. It's probably a whole webinar by itself, but I'll try and be a little bit brief. So I think the most important thing is just to educate everybody about what we've talked about. So all of those risks can be mitigated just through behavior, through checking and that kind of thing. So you can operate your business very well, and your engineering team can operate very well as long as they're aware of the problems and they don't accidentally, they don't break those rules just through not knowing something. So one of the most interesting things is to just be intentional about building a culture around AI. And the first thing is to figure out kind of where you are. So I mean, I think even from the polls, it shows that a lot of people are just using the tools without actually sort of asking for permission, because there's no explicit policy in place. So I think in that kind of space, the best thing to do is to figure out where you are and then decide where you want to go. So if you want to be explicit about everybody can use the tools and they should just embrace them, then there'll be gaps between the two. So at Root, we basically had an exploration session with a whole company, and we just discussed the tools and how people are using them. Came up with some very interesting things, like the way that people were using ChatGPT, and it was a great exploration session. So it was actually quite fun. And you could break that down by department if your company's too big for that kind of exercise, but just to find out where you are and then figure out the gaps. So there may be gaps in knowledge or understanding of the risks or the gains, because the gains are substantial. So productivity, efficiency, all those kind of things. So figure out the gaps and then just try to fill them through training, through education. And then the most effective thing I've seen is to just build a culture around evangelists within your organization. So we had two developers that were keen to try out the tools. And so we gave them access to the tools, we paid for them, we encouraged them, and then they came back and they were extremely excited by the change in their way of work. And they just started like talking to the rest of the team and showing them how to use the tools, and then doing talks to the whole company on using those tools. So that was extremely effective, and it got the whole team on board with the best practice ways of covering the risks and not falling into sort of any traps. It was very cool. And then we did a hackathon. So whole company stopped for 2 days, and we basically just got everybody, didn't matter what their function was within the company, made about 12 different teams. And then everybody just dove into AI tools, used OpenAI, an OpenAI account that we had, and we gave everyone keys to that, and then we built things. And we got some outside help, a company called make.dev, Aretha, Shan, and Dan. They were amazing at facilitating a hackathon. And at the end of that, we were basically in a really good spot with Roots. So everyone embraced AI in a very sort of safe and sustainable way. So everyone knew what to do. And it's part of our onboarding now. Like, how do you use these tools without exposing us to these risks? So it's very cool. So we use that as a kind of core part of our way of work. It's very cool.
Okay, that's I mean,
sorry.
Yeah, no, just summarizing. So I mean, it sounds like great leadership advice, like because this is happening behind the scenes. Like people are using it maybe without it, but they're going at it alone. As a tech leader, you can make it explicit, and you can create more collaboration to share experience and knowledge share around it. So it doesn't have to happen from a complete grassroots level to say like, I'm doing this. It's like, okay, let's actually come together. And I mean, Khotso was asking, like, his company or their company has got strict policies around it. I mean, it sounds like the thing is like, just don't go at it alone. Like, be more open, see how other people are doing it, and learn from each other. That's like what your experience has been, where the main benefits are.
Yeah, I think there's so many, like everybody has a different approach to using the tools, and it's very impactful to share those approaches, and then it just multiplies. It's great to watch. It's fantastic to watch. Yeah. Just one final point is if you're well, there's this saying that says what you measure is who you are. So I think a lot of the times just making sure that you're measuring like what you're doing and sort of in terms of OKRs, DORA, sprint velocity, those kind of things, just helps you understand the adoption and the where the gaps are still. So you might find that one team has a problem with the tools or something like that, and you can kind of measure it, So we did have that where we were actually not sure why a particular set of people were not using the tools, and so we engaged with them and asked what was happening, and it was just some misunderstanding about how it worked, or in some cases a licensing issue or something like that. So it's good to measure. Like I think it's important to measure and understand like how well the team is performing with the tools. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We could talk about this endlessly, I think, and there's so many good questions here. I mean, around hiring, being specific about, like just, solving the tech assignment one time with ChatGPT or something like that.
Yeah,
and just, making sure the intent is there. So it seems like a lot about communication, but unfortunately it is time to wrap up. There are more topics like this. I mean, this is just one in a series, and we're going to be continuing these community events. So if you would like to attend, please look at the poll now quickly before you drop off and express your interest. And that will be the last of us. Thanks so much for attending, everyone. Mike, always a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you for sharing the insights of your research and what you've been doing at Root. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the session, Nick. It was great.
All right. Have a good afternoon.